Most people work way too long because of healthcare. And it's not because they can't afford to retire or that the numbers wouldn't work out. No, it's actually because no one ever showed them what the actual numbers for healthcare actually cost, what they cost before Medicare and what they cost after you turn 65. And here's the kicker. You may not know this. Both of those numbers, what premiums cost, they can be controlled and they can be lowered. That's right. I want to let that sink in for you. It's all based on your adjusted gross income. See, no one ever tells you this. So what do people do? They just keep working and working and working until they turn 65 and qualify for Medicare because it's scary to pay for health insurance. That's what we've been told in early retirement. Now, here's what I found consistently with working with my clients in retirement for over a decade. The moment you understand the actual structure, right? What drives premium costs, what controls them, and what decisions you actually have the ability to make, that anxiety, once we see that premium for the first time, it disappears. Because health insurance and those costs should not be a mystery in retirement. So in our next 15 minutes together, I'm going to walk you through the complete framework for healthcare and retirement, both pre-65 and after Medicare, and the one income decision that controls both of them. So by the end of this video, you will have a specific framework, a number for each phase of retirement. Let's start with the phase that creates the most anxiety. That's the gap between when you retire early and when Medicare kicks in at 65. Now, this could be 10 years or it could be a year long, depending on how old you are when you retire. Now, regardless, once you retire and your coverage ends through your employer, this gives you basically 4 realistic options. You have COBRA, a spouse's employer plan if you're married, if it's available and they're still working, part-time work to qualify for coverage, but hey, you just retired, so who wants that? We're not going to go too much into detail there. And then the ACA, right, the Affordable Care Act Marketplace. Now let's start with COBRA. Now COBRA lets you stay with your employer's plan for up to 18 months, but here's the catch. You're no longer employed, so you're paying both sides of the premium, both what your employer used to pay and what was deducted from your paycheck. And so for a lot of people, that's a big surprise. So for example, we'll say a couple in their early 60s, COBRA could run at $1,500 to $2,000 a month easily, sometimes more depending on the coverage. Now, best part, you get to keep your coverage, no interruptions, but it's expensive. But it's seamless, same network, same coverage, 0 disruption. So if you're within 18 months of 65, COBRA oftentimes is the easiest bridge. But again, it's really expensive relative, and most people don't know that there's a better option if you're retiring before 65. Now, as far as your spouse's coverage, pretty straightforward. Same thing if you were to work part-time. Not going to go too deep into that. But here's where things begin to get really interesting. The Open Care, or I'll say the ACA Open Network Marketplace. Now, this is where that one variable changes everything. Your premium, it's based on your income. That's right, your adjusted gross income, AGI, not your net worth, not what you earned 2 years ago, like we'll dive into in just a moment with Medicare, but your income today, day one of retirement. So if we take our friends that you've seen from my videos before, Frank and Janet Miller, they retired at 60 and they need to spend about $10,000 a month. Now, what we'll see here on the screen is if they decided to take all of their money from an IRA, from a 401k, that would drive their ACA Marketplace premiums pretty expensive to about $2,000, $2,500 a month, somewhere in that range, depending on the level of coverage that they wanted. That's $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year. That's the number that's really scary, that keeps people dead in their tracks and keeps them working much longer than they need to. But what we'll see here is that if Frank and Janet were working together strategically and had it invested in multiple baskets, right? They had a Roth IRA, they had a high yield savings account, they had a taxable brokerage account, meaning they had levers of where they could pull their money from. What we see here is if we start taking money out of those accounts and structured their adjusted gross income to somewhere around $60,000 to $70,000, all of a sudden, those premiums shift. They drop to $200 to $500 a month, again, depending on the level of care that they wanted. That's a $20,000 difference. And again, this is all based on where they decided to take their money out from. So if you're watching this video and you're in your 50s and you're still working, this is why having that flexibility of having a brokerage account, a high yield savings account just beyond your emergency savings, we call that your war chest, and also a Roth IRA, this creates different levers that we can pull from rather than taking everything out from a pre-tax 401k, IRA, that's all taxed on ordinary income. So again, we need to know what's inside of our control. If we have enough time to retirement, we need to start planning ahead of where we're making those contributions. If we go over the cliff just by $1, you don't qualify. So we need to know where those limits are and how we structure our income and having a plan for that. If you're within 5 years of retirement and you want to know exactly how healthcare and those costs fit into your overall retirement plan, click on the link in the description below, fill out the questionnaire, and I'll make you a personalized Loom video walking you through what healthcare costs in your retirement and how it could potentially be lowered based off of how we sequence where your withdrawals come out from. So click on the link in the description below. Let's get back to our content. Now, once Medicare starts at age 65, the cost structure, whole different beast. And this is where a lot of the misinformation lies. Now, there's a few parts to Medicare, A, B, C, D, G, and there's a whole lot of other ones like alphabet soup. But know that for Part A, it's free. It's hospital coverage. If you worked at least 10 years and you paid into the system, you already bought it. Zero premium, it's already yours. I don't have to spend too much time there. Now, here's the actual number that most people never bother to look up, but it is really important. That's Part B for your doctor visits, outpatient care, lab work, and that runs at standard $202.90 a month per person in 2026. That's it. Now, that could come as a genuine sigh of relief. Let's look at the chart here, because this is where most people get blindsided. We call this IRMAA, meaning if your income exceeds certain thresholds, you pay surcharges on top of that base premium of $202.90. Now, that first tier, if we're married and our income's above $218,000, we're going to pay a little more. And those surcharges, as we can see, they range anywhere on the lowest for tier 2 is $81, all the way up to $689 per person per month, depending on where your income is. Now, feels like a bit of an ambush, and that usually gets deducted from your Social Security if you're already taking that. Now, IRMAA, it's based on your tax return from 2 years ago. So if you were making a bunch of money and you retired, well, we're going to pay IRMAA. You did a big Roth conversion. You sold a house or a business, or you had one high income year that was bigger for whatever reason, it's going to trigger IRMAA. Now, even if your income is completely back to normal, you're still paying it. But here's what I want you to know. It's foreseeable. It's plannable. This is where we have to map it out because it's published every year, so it shouldn't come as a surprise. And this is exactly where withdrawal sequencing, where we're taking that dollar from, really matters. Now, good news, if you just retired and your income went, say, from $300,000 or $400,000 down to $150,000 or whatever your retirement distributions are, and you're looking at IRMAA and the cost of insurance, and you're going, I can't pay this, or this is insanely expensive, there is something you could do. You can file an appeal because work stoppage is a qualifying event. You could fill out Form SSA-44 and list your income and what it's expected to be and check that box and file for that appeal to see if that's going to get approved and accepted. And then know going forward that IRMAA is going to be based off of your income, and that's where we get into the work of withdrawal sequencing. Now, Part D, your prescription drug coverage. That's when you enroll, it's typically $30 to $70 a month, depending on your plan and your state. IRMAA can trigger that too, but it's not nearly as dramatic as Part B. When you enroll in Medicare, you're going to have two paths. And this is where people make this decision without fully knowing the trade-offs. You have Advantage on one side and a supplemental or Medigap, that's Part G, on the other. Now, before I dive into any of this at a very high level, I'll say that we leave this decisions to the professionals. We work with a number of great independent providers like Move Health, who we could link to in the description. And they sit down with our clients, with us in the room, and they walk them through each of those plan choices side by side, compare costs, network, doctors, coverage, all that type of stuff. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you get to have the doctor and the provider and the network of your choice. Now, a Medicare supplement, the Medigap plan. What I love about this, unlimited provider choice, more predictable costs, and a lower annual deductible. Now, it does come with higher premiums, but that lower deductible and, again, provider of choice. Now, Advantage is completely free. $0 premiums and looks dramatically cheaper up front, but it's got that restrictive provider network. Now, again, it's the $0 premium per month, which a lot of people like, but it does limit your network and who you're able to see. And what we've actually found is it could lead to higher actual usage costs despite lower premium, meaning what you're paying for out of pocket may actually be higher than what the fine print specifies. Now, that's where we want to sit down with a provider and a specialist and look side by side as we begin to sequence, as we begin to say, how much is health insurance going to cover and cost us? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure you get your coverage, you get your doctor, your network, and we know what that costs so we can begin modeling what retirement is going to look like for you and whether or not you're ready to retire. Now, here's the thing that most people don't realize until they've looked at both phases together. Remember the two phases, retirement before age 65 and retirement after 65 with Medicare, is that your income in retirement, specifically how you choose to structure those withdrawals across the different types of accounts, right? Roth IRA, brokerage, high yield savings account, IRA is the single most powerful lever you could have on your total healthcare costs, and I'll say taxes as well, across your entire retirement. That's a big window. You see, healthcare, it's not a separate line item that sits outside of your expenses or financial planning. It's deeply embedded into every decision you make about your expenses and retirement. For example, you do a Roth conversion. Well, health insurance is going to go up. You have more capital gains. You make more money. All those decisions have trade-offs. And this is where planning gets really creative. And this is where we say it's art and science blended with your decisions of what's most essential to you. They're not separated. They're big decisions that are connected together, and it's all about trade-offs. So when we plan them together, we can manage your total retirement costs, including healthcare, with a level of precision that most people don't realize is available. This is also why that just budget for a health insurance in retirement, that's not complete advice. We need to have a budget number that changes each and every year based off of those trade-offs, because that number is a function of the income decisions we make year by year. That's why we say financial planning, it's a verb. It is always moving, it's changing, right? Because if we have a written financial plan and we don't do anything with it, it's obsolete. We need to be able to understand how our life, how our retirement, how our income changes year by year. So those decisions, those trade-offs are conversations you need to have. Which one is more powerful? Taxes, lower taxes later on in retirement via Roth conversions, income structuring today and lower health insurance, understanding required minimum distribution. These are all trade-offs that come at the cost potentially of higher or lower health insurance and taxes. I want to give you the actual framework. Now, we retire before 65. We got a couple things to keep on our radar. That's understanding our ACA income thresholds. And it shouldn't be a mystery. It's all published online. We know where those subsidy cliffs are. And at 65, this is where the enrollment in Medicare kicks in. And just like the ACA, there's subsidies, there's tiers, but we call this IRMAA. Key point being we have to know where those tiers are, what our income's going to be, and we walk through the different types of parts and coverages, the difference between a supplemental and an advantage plan, but we now have a complete and a specific number based off of where we choose to structure our income from. And so as we look at both phases, both pre-65 and after 65 with Medicare, we need to be able to build out that multi-year income projection until required minimum distributions start at 75 and begin flagging the years where we could be getting close to that ACA or those IRMAA cliffs. And this is where we have that trade-off where we model out. Do we do a Roth conversion? Do we want lower health insurance? Which one is most valuable? But again, as we get closer to retirement, this is where saving into those other baskets like a high yield savings account, a brokerage account, a Roth IRA becomes incredibly valuable. So we have those levers to pull from, because once we do that, health insurance stops becoming a line item. It's something that we could plan around, we could optimize and stop worrying about. And that's the whole point. So I want to thank you for watching. If this was helpful, go ahead and click and subscribe. I put out new content every week on the stuff that actually matters when you're getting close to retirement. I'll see you in the next video.